Our title is Best Practice in Home Language Teaching. For each of us, that may mean different things, but here in India it is important because we have many home languages, each with rich cultural heritages. And so it is with great pleasure that I welcome to our panel two specialists in the field of Hindi education, Varsha Rodewald, the IB coordinator at Ascend International School, and Chandrika Mathur, a leading writer of Hindi educational books and curricula. Her series of books, Hindi Ki Duniya 1 to 5, published in 2013, were the product of many years of work developing interesting and effective materials for the teaching of Hindi, and we look forward to the insights she will bring to tonight's discussion. Here at DSB International School, we serve an international and Indian community, and there are many home languages, but for all of us, we are aware of the importance that the IB places on the teaching of host nation languages. And whilst we are in the early stages of teaching Hindi, it has only been a curricular subject for about 18 months, our IBDP coordinator and head of secondary, Camille Gauthier, is joining us from France and will be reflecting on the importance that the IB gives to host nation languages. We are also privileged to be joined by Rafael Angel from Mexico, an internationally renowned leader in the field of language education, who brings the perspective of both a home language and second language teacher. Finally, our panel is enriched by the presence of an outstanding student from Ascend School, Nayantara Perumal, who will bring a young learner's perspective to the discussion, who I am sure Rafael will be very pleased to hear is an enthusiastic student of Spanish. As a science teacher with no professional expertise in the field of language learning, I would just like to say that I have always celebrated the use of host nation language in my classroom, be it in Mexico or here in India. So first of all, welcome very much to everybody. Welcome to our panelists. And I would like to hand over to Varsha Agarwal to start the evening with her questions.
Thank you so much, Howard. Before I start, I just wanted to mention that where Chandrika is in the midst of a cyclone. So we have just lost our connection with her, but hopefully she will be back soon. So please don't worry. We have a plan B, and I hope she's back with us soon. I just want to start by, first of all, being very grateful for being, a part of this conversation today, because I think a conversation about languages is not just a conversation about language, but also about culture, about identity, and also the knowledge systems associated with it. And of course, the fun and smiles. Even the 10 minutes, before we met, before starting this webinar, it's all about stereotypes. It's about pronunciations. And that's what's so rewarding about being a language teacher. And I'm sure Nayantara will agree also about being a language student. I think this conversation is all the more important because the definition of family today is continuously evolving. The definition of ethnicity is evolving. Nationality is evolving. And also from, where people feel local or where people feel at home. As you see, we're all in different parts of the world, but still representing our identities through our language and our culture. So it's really a good time to talk about it. And of course, I'm also glad to be amidst all these change makers on the panel today. That's what I'd like to call them, because they are not just doing such, amazing work where pedagogy and writing curriculum is concerned, but they are also changing mindsets of people, of students, of parents, of teachers. So a very, very warm welcome. And without much ado, I'm going to start with my first question. And this one goes out to Camille and Raphael, and I'd request Camille to begin with it. Since we both operate Ascend International and DSB in the IB context, what do you think is the purpose of home language teaching? Camille, first you, and then Raphael, you to follow.
Thank you. I thought I'd start with giving you a little bit of background about how the IB approaches home language teaching. When it was first set up, it was a program that was putting an emphasis on learning at least two languages, one being the mother tongue and the other one being a foreign language. And historically, English was always given more importance to the mother tongue. And the IB fairly quickly realized that, and there was a shift, along with a shift within the UN as well, when they started talking about children's rights and children's rights to be educated in their own language. And so they started offering more languages to support mother tongue language within the IB. And in fact, today, most languages are represented in the IB programs and can be studied at the DP level. And that shift has been embedded in the IB standards and practices, which all schools need to kind of evidence in their program implementation. In fact, one of the IB standards and practices clearly states the school places importance on language learning, including mother tongue, host country language, and other languages. And I think that's where things become very interesting within our Indian context, the idea of mother tongue and host country language. And that really is the complexities of our context. In India, there is no national language. There are 23 official languages. Of course, Hindi and English tend to be a bit more important in terms of the administration and business, but each state operates within its own language paradigm. And so what does that mean for us as IB schools in India? As I did my research, I also found a little bit of data. For those who know me, you'll know that I like data and statistics. But I think that's kind of going to bring a little bit of meat also to the conversation. I looked at the May 2019 exam series, so that's last year, and I looked at India specifically. There were 4,217 candidates that were entered in India. And out of those 4,217, 33 took Bengali, 169 took Hindi, and fewer than 10 took Kannada, Punjabi, Tamil, and Telugu. That's as mother tongue languages. The other languages were not even represented. Gujarati and Marathi were not represented. They are available, they can be taken, but they were not represented. That means that about 4,000 candidates, that's 95% of all candidates in India, chose to study English as a mother tongue language. Some of them are definitely mother tongue language speakers. I rather suspect not all of them. Now, if we look at the language B, which is the foreign language, there were 1,379 students taking Hindi B. That's 33%, exactly. 1/3 of students chose to study Hindi as a foreign language in India. And I thought that these statistics were very, very telling. Interestingly, no other Indian language was taken at B level as a foreign language anywhere in the world. That's not just an Indian issue. I lived for 2 years in Russia, and a number of our Russian speakers would also take English mother tongue languages. So I think this is kind of the IB's perspective, is that we need to emphasize and we need to develop and we need to offer opportunities for students to study in their mother tongue. In our context, how do we do that? How do we encourage students to take pride in learning the language? And just before I pass on the stage, so to speak, to Raphael, I'd just like to leave you with 2 quotes that I came across in my research. The first one was from an IB educator who was setting up a mother tongue language program in Singapore within an IB school, who says, "Let's not forget that the cornerstone of a student's identity and sense of belonging relies on their knowledge and use of their mother tongue language." And I thought that was interesting within our context, considering a lot of our students don't study their mother tongue language. And finally, and that comes from one of the IB core documents from the language and learning in IB programs, so across all languages, across all IB programs, access to power is easily controlled through selective access to particular languages with high status. And the idea of languages with high status, of course, we think of English, to a lesser extent Spanish and French. But how are we serving our students by not allowing them to study in their mother tongue, and how do we operate a shift from those high status languages to the home languages and the host country languages?
Thank you, Camille. Over to you, Raphael. What would you like to add to that?
First of all, I would like to acknowledge the insights that Camille brought in with data. Data is a beautiful representation of a phenomenon. And I would like to contribute to that by also helping us reflect on context and where schools are placed, and recognizing the role of schools. From this standpoint, I believe that very similar to the person that owns a toy shop, creates a toy shop and wants to be the best toy shop in the neighborhood. When a school is created, that school has the aspiration of becoming a contributing school, a school that plays a significant role in the neighborhood. And the school can have that power, because if the school disappears and the neighborhood misses it, that means that that school has had impact. So how do we ensure having that impact in our context? Mother tongue is a great access to that, because just like the toy shop owner wants to sell the best toys, a school should have the best contribution to improve the community. And if that is done in a language that is common to the vast majority, the students and the educators that are part of the school, of the direct school community, will not be the only people receiving benefits from it. And for me, this is the main role of the host country's language, to empower the community for full potential, for full growth, and to remove the barriers of privilege. Because regardless of whether we are public education, we are teachers or students in public education or in private education, it's an inherent part of all of us to contribute, to give back. And what best thing that to continue giving back to the people that may not have the same privileges as us. So that is the relevance of the language, bringing power into the community to empower that community to leave a mark and to transcend.
Thank you so much, Raphael. I think you've raised a couple of important points, and we'll kind of put them together, after the end of the first round, where status of the language is concerned, or, promoting that power of host or home language learning is concerned, after listening to some more perspectives. Chandrika, my next question goes to you. Are you able to hear me? I know that Chandrika has lost electricity and has tried to connect through her phone. Chandrika, you can keep the video off if that's easier for you.
Yes.
And my question to Chandrika, and then again to Raphael after Chandrika, is that what do you see as the chief benefits of quality home language learning?
Home language is something, actually the child has heard that language, and it's a language through which the child connects with the family, with the community around, and as the child connects with the family, with the community, the child is also connecting back to herself, and that sort of it also develops her thinking capacity, because it's only as we interact with others that we actually start developing our own thinking. And the thinking capacity actually gets best developed in your home language. If the home language is well developed and a person is able to use the home language well, effectively in family context, but also in outside context, then it's also eventually it's very easy to learn other languages if you know your home language well, because it's from the basis of being able to speak a language well that you can actually transfer many skills onto the new language that you're going to learn. And so a strong base in home language is something which is really going to not just be useful for a person in terms of, the instrumentalist value, so to say, that, okay, so I can speak to someone, or, but it is also useful to actually develop the thinking power of a person. And that thinking power can be used to connect with others, and it can also be used to connect with yourself and to process what's going on with you, process your own experiences. So I would stop with this right now, and I hope that, in the course of the discussion, we'll be able to touch upon a few more things. Over to you, Arsh.
Thank you, Chandrika. And Raphael, what would you like to add to that?
There's two concepts that play in my head in a very powerful way, Varsha, and that is the concept of contribution and the concept of production. Ensuring that a home language, a mother tongue is enhanced, developed, and used to produce and to disseminate knowledge guarantees that there will be continuity to our roots. And while we may think that English has taken over as a world language, not everybody in the world will eventually speak English. There will be some people that will not learn English ever. In India, in this context, in Mexico, in my context, So for those people, I feel that as educators, as learners, we need to have that moral responsibility of ensuring that knowledge continues to be created, that quality information needs to continue to be created so that the future generations have access to that. That is the source of critical thinking from a society. We cannot pretend that critical thinking exists only when we start picking up an additional language. And I will hang on to the concept of critical thinking that Chandrika mentioned. Critical thinking happens when we're able to exchange perspectives. And if our perspectives come in only one language, even though we know we have the capacity to convey ideas in at least two, we're missing a chance ourselves.
Thank you so much, Raphael. And Chandrika as well. And before I actually move on to Nayantara and we, listen to her journey of language learning, I just wanted to point out some notes that I have written and also the questions that these points that I have noted kind of raise. Camille spoke about the word status, and I think especially in the Indian context, we are really struggling with giving Hindi that status or the local languages the status that it requires. And very often as an educator myself, it's a challenge that not just we as educators face, but also the messages that are coming from home, because very often students, associate Hindi or the local languages with the language spoken with your house help or the driver. And very often I have students saying, Miss, but I'm never going to speak this. Why do I need to learn this? So I think this is something that needs to change. And, we need all decks, like all hands on deck to be able to do that. Also, Chandrika, you raised a very important point about the thinking capacity. And now that, Camille spoke about IB being very aware of the importance of language learning, I think we are also seeing the word translanguaging coming into IB, where we are encouraging students to think in their own language in the classroom and, take pride and use it to actually learn another language and, navigate the content in their own language and then in English if required or whatever the language is of the school. Of course, the connectedness, and I think Chandrika, Raphael, you've both spoken about identity and its relationship, like how the language connects you to the roots. And I think that's something that I realized, when I left India and went to a university abroad and what that means, to have your language, your culture, and of course, we'll hear from Nayantara in a bit. So this is kind of a summary of the points that you put together. And now over to you, Nayantara, to talk a little bit about your journey of language learning.
Yeah, so during grades 6, 7, and 8, which were the first 3 years of the middle year program at my school, Ascend International School, I was required to study both Spanish and Hindi as subjects. So Spanish, of course, was a very new language for me because at my previous school, I had just shifted from my previous school during grade 6 to Ascend. I had never ever had any experience, studying a foreign language other than, of course, studying English and Hindi as language subjects. And so it was completely new to me. And Hindi, I had obviously some experience studying it as a subject, but just because of the way it was taught to me at my previous school and the way it was sort of presented to me as a subject, I did not like it very much, and I just did not enjoy Hindi as a subject. But in Ascend, I came to learn, and when I became more familiar with the method that Ascend used to teach me, I grew to love both subjects immensely, because we didn't just focus and sort of check the box to say that these are the requirements of learning this particular language. We need to learn it and learn to speak it. We sort of delved into how we could apply the language in a variety of different contexts and how we could sort of use our voice in a variety of different aspects of our lives with that language. So for example, we had a debate on gender equality in Hindi, which was such a memorable experience for me. We even made a YouTube video for Spanish, and we could engage in discussions with our classmates where we actually share our opinions. So that process of learning language enabled me to love both Hindi and Spanish. And then in grade 9, of course, things got more serious because the subjects were going to become more rigorous. And of course, there was a lot more we had to do. So I was asked to choose either Hindi or Spanish. And that is when, I decided to drop Hindi as a subject and take up Spanish. So this decision, I think, mainly came from an academic viewpoint where, I was academically sort of considering which language I would be able to perform better in. And just because Spanish was still a new language to me and, I was still learning and developing my skills in Spanish, I felt that it was it would just be a better fit for me. So I went through with it, and I currently study Spanish in school. So yeah, that's just an overview of my journey.
Thank you very much, Nayantara. Chandrika, I remember we were having a conversation about these language choices, and Nayantara just mentioned, how for one reason or the other she changed and dropped Hindi and continued with Spanish. Would you like to add to, what she had to say, or do you have any questions for her related to that?
Yes. Actually, it's really lovely to hear that Nayantara eventually enjoyed learning Hindi in the middle years. And even as she was enjoying learning Hindi, she took a conscious decision of opting for Spanish for multiple reasons. Those reasons would probably have to do with what her aspirations are for the next stage of her life. I myself used to teach French in Rishi Valley School, and there would be several students who would actually want to opt for French and leave Hindi behind once they came to the 8th or the 9th standard. And so there were several reasons why they would do that. And so one of the reasons was that French is considered to be a scoring subject, and Hindi is not considered to be a scoring subject. The other much more a reason which I used to find, which used to make me really think that we need to do something about Hindi, is that they actually often students used to say, but we don't connect with the curriculum. We don't connect with what is going on in the classes. The Hindi classes are a little, they're passive, we get bored. So when a student says that I get bored, actually behind that boredom are many, many things. One of the things is that they are not able to connect with what's going on in the class. The other is that they just don't feel empowered with the language. As Nayantara said, that they had a wonderful experience, and I'm so happy to hear that. They actually used to have debates. They used to, they used to use the language in order to explore ideas. And they used to use the language in order to generate meaning for themselves, rather than just simply receive meaning, rather than knowledge being simply transferred, where you're just asking for the meanings of words. So I think some of these things actually help, they're a little bit linked with, as you had mentioned, a little bit linked with the social sidelining of Indian languages. A little bit, there is the thing that there are probably not sufficiently good teaching learning materials, and a little bit also linked with the fact that the pedagogies themselves need to be renewed in home languages. I think all these three things need to come together if we are to strengthen the home language learning in India. And I think it's extremely important that we do strengthen the home language learning, because, it's through the language that the culture gets transmitted. Actually, it's languages that carry our culture, and it's the languages which actually sustain the culture. And it's through languages that we can question the culture. We can engage with it, and we can also question it. So, I mean, these are some of the reasons why it's important. Right now, the situation is this, but a situation can easily change, but we have to work towards that change.
Thank you, Nayantara, and thank you, Chandrika. I think we got to hear perspectives, from Nayantara. That was the student perspective, how pedagogy matters, how you learn a language matters, because that captures your interest from the student perspective. The teacher can make or break the language classroom. And Chandrika, of course, you also mentioned, that the type, the pedagogy needs to change. It's not just about sitting in the class and, being like a sponge and just receiving information. It's what you do with what, you learn. So, how you mobilize that language. So I think this is the right point to transition to Harvard, where we are actually going to talk about some of the strategies, what needs to change, how can we optimize teaching and learning in the classroom. So thank you to all of you, and over to you, Harvard.
Thank you very much, Varsha. And yes, indeed, that does lead straight into the first question which I'd got there. So, Raphael, the importance of home language learning is relegated often to a minor level by schools, families and societies. And I think that happens globally. In your experience, how does this impact the development of pedagogy? I will then speak with Varsha, but it'd be interesting to hear an outside of India concept first of all.
No problem, Howard. Thank you for the floor. At some point, there is this aspect of marketing behind each language, you know, the language that is cool, the language that is rich in culture, the language that offers experiences, that language that offers pleasure. But I would like to, on top of that, put that idea of purpose. I think that the moment that schools find a purpose for choosing languages to offer and for placing specific emphasis on some, is when they achieve this degree of influence over the community and over parents. And this is a drive that may attract parents to specific schools because of the purpose for their choices of language and how they are empowering, how they're using the languages as instruments to transform. In Mexico, certainly, for example, I am part of the generation where English was fashionable. But in English speaking, English never managed to replace Spanish. No. For some reason, we managed to retain our love for our home language, for our mother tongue. And I think we did it at the time that the internet became a hype. So all of a sudden, I think the attraction that every Spanish speaker in Mexico and how it was communicated to parents is the language continues to be an instrument of influence despite the presence of English. And parents bought into that, the fact that eventually their children may return home. And what a better thing than to have a child that spoke educated Spanish and not broken Spanish, or who was Mexican and sounded like a foreigner. So that idea of purpose to enhance power, to enhance ideals, and to contribute. I hang on to this word. I think that's one thing that helps define curriculum, that helps define how we present the offer to parents, and that helps define how we engage the students in the reflection of our design.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, Varsha, what is it that teachers can do? What is it about their pedagogy that can really give this sense of purpose to languages that perhaps are seen as lower status?
Mm-hmm. You know, Howard, I would like to start by, mentioning what role the family plays. And, in my experience as a teacher, I have experienced that there's a lot of emotional attachment to Hindi, but, it does not have equal amount of effort being put, in teaching that language. Like Raphael said, they've managed to keep that Spanish alive. Your parents have realized the importance. I think parents do realize the importance, but we don't see the effort, that goes into keeping that status high. Because, let's say if you go out to a restaurant in Mumbai, then the parents choose to place an order in English when you do have the option, to place the order in Hindi. So the students are getting these messages. And that is what is coming in the way. Where, of course, we also have, I would say, where teaching and learning is concerned, I'll talk a little bit about the hurdles and then how you overcome those hurdles. I think we are not, Hindi teachers are not very fortunate where resources are concerned. It's on a high. I would say there are a lot of better literature books available, at different reading levels, and this wasn't the case 10 years ago. So, of course, I started teaching at an IB school in the PYP 10 years ago at Ascend, and we hardly had resources. It's a lot of effort, teachers have to put in to create material. If you just compare it to what's available for Spanish, or I'm not aware for Mandarin, but Spanish, yes, we teach, so I can compare that. There is so much good quality material available. So I just feel that teachers who are creative and, manage to create that material also manage to make that class interesting. So that is one piece. Also, Hindi literature, India is blessed with so much good Hindi literature, but it's still not accessible in a way that, you would have it brought down to a level of a primary student, then scaled up to the, let's say, middle year student and then the DP. It's still a struggle to reach that. And because the students have not, learned Hindi the way they've learned English, it takes way longer to access that literature. So from the teacher's end, I would say it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of creative thinking. I think Nayantara mentioned, she's experienced the difference where it's not just about learning the words, being able to spell them right, being able to get the grammar right, but where am I going to use this in my life? Where am I going to communicate with a person in Hindi? That's a different type of Hindi that I need. The written Hindi is very, very different. As an educator, I also noticed that another challenge is to, maintain the level of speaking and writing. So our, students here manage to speak the language pretty well, but the writing is what takes longer. So I think for the teacher, that's also a challenge, but you can do it in so many different ways. It's about making writing real. It's not about writing, an essay related to a redundant topic, but versus a blog that, will make a difference to people's lives or, awareness. So these are some strategies, that we use and try to make the class more engaging. And it's more a two-way process or a multi-way process rather than just the student sitting and, receiving information.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, Raphael, did you want to dive in again?
No, Varsha mentioned something that made me think about the potential of pedagogy, Howard, and it's something that I reflected on when I was invited to publish the books for NYP Spanish before there were any books as a reference. If there are no resources, we should produce them. We should change the mindset and of continuing to believe that I am not a better teacher because I don't have the resources. We teachers are the creators of every other profession. Creating resources, it's just like cooking food. So if we empower ourselves, because we see our students, we know the reality that they're living in, we know what influences are touching them, we know how perspectives are shaping them, we have the perfect ingredients to create relevant resources that fit the moment. Because the audience is in front of us.
Thank you. Yes, an inspiring message. And it would have flowed beautifully onto the question I was going to ask Chandrika, but I don't know whether she's actually on the line or not. So I'm just going to have to busk this one. What I was interested really was Chandrika has actually done quite a lot of resource creation for Hindi. And I think, one of the messages coming from both Raphael and Varsha and from what Nayantara said was really this concept of authentic learning. That, why are we learning this and where does it get us to? So now I see that Chandrika is back with us, which is fantastic. Right. And so I'm going to ask you, Chandrika, as someone who has developed Hindi curricula, what were the things that you felt were really important to make this effective? And as someone who is also a second language teacher, that you are a French language teacher, were you able to draw from the influences of this sort of the worldwide French language teaching community to inform your Hindi teaching materials?
Sorry, I've been going in and out.
Yes.
We are right in the midst of the cyclone area. And so I have unfortunately not heard the last bit of what was said. To answer your question, Howard, I would say that one of the things which was most important for me when I started thinking of developing materials to teach Hindi to children was to get children active, to get children to be, to be doing things in class, to be not just be receptive to whatever, to say a story or something, but, put yourself in the shoes of a character, or let's play games with some of the vocabulary which has been introduced in the stories. Just become more active in using the language. And the other thing which I found, I thought it was one of the things which really helped me was that I used to try to get students to make sense themselves of what they were reading. I used to try to get them to generate meaning from, from pictures, from text, etc. And the other thing which was very important in developing this was the understanding that there is a certain systematicity which is required to learn any language. And the materials needed to be fairly systematic, and you needed to develop, different pathways so there was one thing which was that the language children should be exposed to rich language. The other thing was that they also needed to learn certain things systematically, and that there should be a fair amount of review. There was enough scope for practice, and that there was enough scope for for playing around. The one thing which children just don't like to do is memorize things. Especially, they love memorizing songs, but they don't like to memorize, vocabulary, etc. So how do you make that interesting? How do you make it fun for them? The idea of just enjoying the classroom space, that was very important. Because I think what I realized was, and I started teaching, whereas I used to teach French to the senior children, I started teaching Hindi to the younger ones. And I realized that the younger ones, even though they come with whatever attitudes they have towards Hindi, but if you make their classes fun and you make their classes interesting, if you keep them active in the class, then they just forget that they came with those attitudes. And then they're just there, they're learning, they're absorbing and enjoying the language. So these are some of the things which I sort of, brought to the class, and I saw a huge difference in the way children were responding. So I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, you have very thoroughly. Thank you very much. Yes, I think, and yeah, I mean, I think what's really nice is a very strong and positive message coming out about good pedagogy and creative teaching being really the answer to the problems with teaching host languages and overcoming some of the prejudices and difficulties. I was interested to know, earlier on we were talking about some of the difficulties of finding accessible Hindi texts for younger learners that will lead them up to enjoying Hindi literature in its sort of like in its adult form, in its more sophisticated form. I know in English we have simplified Shakespeare's and things like that, and I was wondering whether you have or are aware of sort of pathways of getting students into Hindi or other host language literature in the same way, through sort of simplified text or whatever.
At the absolute beginner level, it's a little difficult to find very simple text. So actually, I began creating very simple texts. However, at the intermediate level, there's a lot of material available. There are lots of stories, and there are wonderful children's magazines in Hindi. There have been people who've been, in fact, I mean, I started working in the area of Hindi about, say, 25 years ago, and at that time, there wasn't so much available. But today, there's a plethora of children's literature available in Hindi. And in other languages, such as Telugu, Telugu is one language that I do know about. However, the distribution networks of these materials are not strong. It's not easy for teachers to access them. Teachers don't even know about the existence of some of these materials. So, I mean, and unless you're really looking, you don't find them. But what I would say is that today, the situation is very different from 25 years ago. And now the issue is really to strengthen the networks of distribution and also share. I think there is not sufficient sharing amongst teachers, Hindi teachers. Whereas as a French teacher, I remember having so many workshops, so many forums where we met and we learned from each other. Unfortunately, Hindi teachers have not had the benefit of this. So I do hope that this seminar would raise consciousness, and hopefully we would be able to connect with teachers, connect with Hindi teachers, and and move forward.
Okay, I think a bit of a call to arms there, really, for our language teachers. So I would like to just talk or go on a little bit more about some of the systemic challenges to host language learning, and I would like to ask Cami if she could talk a little bit about the university requirements and how those might drive students' language choices, which may also to some extent reflect on the conversation Nayantara was having earlier about her own language choices. So Cami, if you would take that over, please.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how much we do as schools, because we remain driven by what the universities say they want. Or rather, we don't, but the students do, which amounts to the same. A lot of universities, and I think that came from the conversation we were having with Varsha on Monday, a lot of universities will say, well, if you want to come and study with us, you need to have this level of English. Now, there's different ways of doing it. You can take a proficiency test on the side if you don't do English A, but equally, English A is recognized as a sufficient level of English, and so most students will just opt for that. Similarly, when it comes to language B, it's clear that a number of Indian students in India will take Hindi B, so Hindi as a second language, because they're going to score well in it. And the way the IB is structured, a 7 in Hindi is worth the exact same amount as a 7 in high level maths. And so why would you not go with the easiest option to score rather than what's important culturally and, when it comes to your identity and your language identity? And so I think until such time as universities decide that it's not just scores that matter, but interest, portfolios, and other things, we're going to be stuck in that forever circle of I'm going to pick the subject that will give me the most points, and that to me is one of the cruxes of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the other panelists think, but the idea of if you are basically a native Hindi speaker, then doing Hindi B, it's not really achieving the aspiration that we're talking about. Coming back to Chandra's first of the points about connecting you with yourself, with your community, with your culture, and also, of course, with that sort of rich literature that's available. I mean, I think that's important there, really, to think about that. So, Raphael, I'd like to ask you whether there was any sort of systemic issues that you felt that tended to mitigate against host language learning. Anything else that you would like to talk about that you think might be relevant?
I will share an idea with pleasure, Howard, and I will not take credit for it. This idea, I witnessed this idea exactly in the year that I left Mexico to become an international educator. I was at a literature conference, and the presenter said this. She is an educator. We should stop asking children to read about dead people. We should start encouraging children to read contemporary authors, people who are alive, people with whom they can connect, people to whom they can tweet, well, there was the Twitter at that time, to whom they can email and challenge their ideas. And if we really reflect on this, a lot of the systemic issues that we have is with the outdated resources that we use. The fact that we have not acknowledged that languages grow as societies evolve. When I worked in India, I remember having this discussion about my love for India as a country that has retained its richness in culture. And I wonder all the time, so how come does that not translate into language? When did India stop producing young voices, giving the youth the voice to continue attracting their people to their languages and not turning into translations. So maybe if the search that we do is about the search of what is happening in the moment, then I think we will start seeing resources. It's not difficult to find resources, Howard. I think the challenge is where we look for them. If we keep asking the big publishers to give them to us, they will give us what they have in store. They will not have the newest voices in the city. They will not know about who is en vogue in a country because publishers don't have that. People do. So something that I witnessed later because I kept asking my friends is, okay, so what happened, whatever happened to that presentation that teacher said, like, well, you know, a lot of schools started organizing literature exhibitions of young authors that wanted to publish or were just published. And all of these things created the new wave of publishing houses in Mexico. That was the startup. And India is the country of startups. So in Mexico, that is the only startup that worked. Young publications. But it changed our approach to literature. Now, schools in Mexico do not read Cervantes and Don Quixote only. We know that there are many people who are alive that are able to convey powerful ideas and engage the youth as powerfully.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, Varsha, I'm thinking about the fact that we live in the city which is the home of the Hindi movie industry, apart from obviously literature and everything else. I mean, how does that impact on the learning of Hindi?
So, Howard, I think I have to be a bit thoughtful while answering that question, because for many people, the Bollywood Hindi is not real Hindi and it's not good Hindi. That's how, many of us perceive like the Bollywood Hindi. But I have seen success and I have seen students who do watch Hindi movies, and there are a bunch of good ones. It's not like, we can say that every Hindi movie, has bad language. I think also the new generation movies, we are seeing a lot of social issues being discussed. And in addition to movies, we are seeing more and more TED Talks coming up in Hindi. So that pool is broadening. But I think there is still, Bollywood Hindi is still perceived to be something you stay away from.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. So, one of the things that we've been talking about, has been mentioned, is the role of parents in home language learning. And I just wanted to go around quickly and take a final few thoughts about what is it that parents can do, what can they do to make, as you said, Varsha, what is the effort that is needed? So I don't know if you'd like to start the ball rolling and then throw the baton on to whoever comes next, really.
Yeah. I'm going to be very short, Howard, and I'm going to say that Hindi speaking needs to be made normal and not feel like a chore. I think that's when it becomes tedious for students, when it's like, now it's Hindi time, we're going to speak Hindi for an hour. Also, not give up when children are still, when they are saying something in Hindi and the children are responding in English, you just continue. And one day it'll be so normal that they'll make that switch and they will get their response in Hindi. That's what one needs to continue. And of course, take pride, make it normal. And like Chandrika so beautifully said, when they forget, then they are speaking it. It becomes so normal, it becomes automatic. Yeah, those would be my 2 bits.
Thank you very much. Cami, your advice to parents?
I was going to use one of the words that Varsha has just used. It's pride. I think if you take pride in the language that you speak, you're going to want to learn it and you're going to want to become proficient in it. But again, going back to the Indian context, I think first of all, families need to identify which of the Indian languages is their home language. And very often the difficulty in families is you'll have a Bengali married to a Gujarati in a Marathi speaking country, state, where Hindi is still the language that's used a lot. And so you need to identify what your language, your home language is, and take pride in that.
Raphael?
I am trying to synthesize ideas that all of the panelists have mentioned, Howard. And one thing is clear to me. I just thought of it right now as I heard Camille explain this. One thing that I believe makes me unique is the fact that I still know my country. I am still academically fluent in Spanish. And when people ask me, "Oh, you speak very fluent English," like, "Yeah, you should listen to me or read my Spanish. It's equally powerful." I think that the fact that I have sustained my mother tongue and still engage with my country and with the whole Spanish-speaking world is what makes me different and makes me proud. That's how Camille was trying to move around the sense of pride. So how great for any professionist to be educated abroad in whatever country, but still have the knowledge of how his or her country is evolving and still have the skills to communicate with the people that are not directly related to his social circle. That is a really local citizen.
Thank you very much. Nayantara, you've been listening to all of this. Do you have any reflections you'd like to share with us?
Well, I just think that, as a student who studied Hindi and is currently studying Spanish, I just think that, I agree with what everybody said. And I just think the idea of, viewing these languages more as languages rather than, requirements and subjects where we just, need to tick boxes and sort of say that, yes, these are the requirements and you need to meet it, and then these are the different grade levels that you get, and you're compartmentalizing so many things within that language in terms of criteria and grades. I think just emphasizing focus, I would say, more on how you learn the language and embracing the process is kind of what makes it more exciting, and I think what inspires a student to learn it more. So yeah, that's just what I think I would add as a student who has taken up both Hindi and Spanish, and how it has sort of played out for me.
Thank you very much. I think very helpful pointers really for the educators here. Chandrika, a final word on this before I move on to a couple of questions from the audience.
Yes, to the parents, I would just say, enjoy speaking to your kids in your language. That's it. Just have fun, just sing with them, play with them, talk to them, read out bedtime stories. That's the kind of thing. It's not really to have to take specific time out. This is something which permeates life. Actually, our home languages permeate life. So just live in the language. That's it, and that's what I would say. And this would take your children really far, because the stronger they are with their home language, they would actually be, they would handle many, many other things in life with equanimity and with a sense of confidence. And that sense of confidence really comes from being able to speak in your own language. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I think probably most importantly, as several of our panelists have said, you will be a better learner of the other languages, of the perceived high stakes languages, or high status languages, if you are truly articulate and fluent in your home language. So thank you very much, Chandrika. So I was just moving on to a couple of questions as we've got a few minutes before we finish our hour. Varsha, an interesting question here that I think is very relevant to a lot of what's been said and perhaps sort of been answered. How does one integrate TOK? And you may deconstruct this question: how to assess or evaluate that it was not merely a debate session in class for 15 minutes, but something concrete and comprehensive?
Howard, is this a TOK question or a language question? That's what I'm trying to
Well, I sort of, as I'm reading it, how do you integrate TOK, and are you bothered whether what you're actually having is a debate in your Hindi class, or you're learning specifics of the? Is it even a relevant point whether you're learning specifics of the language at that point in time?
Honestly, for me as a teacher, it doesn't matter what we are discussing as long as students talk and communicate. So that would be my first response. So it's not really, that this is a TOK class in particular, you need language to discuss TOK, right? That cannot happen in isolation. And I'm not sure what the audience member is wanting to ask me, you know, where TOK it really is concerned. But I think that just to be able to make connections, like in my TOK class, when we're talking, let's say, about indigenous societies, that's where language comes in and plays a very important role. And you do the discussions related to language. Of course, we don't land up discussing that in Hindi, or, you know, we wouldn't land up discussing that in Spanish, but we are still discussing the importance of what that knowledge system means. So I think that would be my response, and I'm not really sure whether I've answered that question, but I've tried my best.
I think you put some good reflections there. I guess if you were teaching Hindi A, then you would expect to be able to do those conversations in Hindi.
Yes, yes.
And I guess that yeah, if you're teaching Raphael, when you teach Spanish A, would you incorporate TOK into your lessons naturally?
Yes, Howard, and even when I used to teach Spanish ab inicio, and as Varsha was articulating her idea, I wrote 3 things here. It's an inherent part. I mean, language is across all subjects. There is not learning in any other subject if we remove language, any mode of language, written, gestural, or visual. So that's one thing. So we learn the language, we learn through the language, and we learn about the language. I think these 3 layers is what really needs to learn or to teach a language. And since there is knowledge in every topic that we touch upon, Howard, why not really looking into the substance of the materials that we use to go deeper into them? It's easier when there is substance in the resources. It's difficult when my topic is about the weekend. It's difficult when my topic is about planning my future. But if I show a painting, if I show a building, if I show the life of somebody's, there will be substance there. There will be knowledge there, and that's when we have the opportunity.
Lovely, thank you very much. Cami, I know you are somebody who's very keen to bring TOK into your language teaching, so just a few thoughts?
Yeah, I think Raphael makes a very good point. You have to take language learning to another level, and unfortunately, too often it is just that. It is that utilitarian approach to language learning, which is, you know, finding direction, asking for directions, shopping for clothes at the supermarket, and making sure they give it to you in the right size. And there's a lot more to that than that in language learning. I think for me, the way I embed a theory of knowledge, TOK, is by talking about perspectives, and perspectives that are brought by a language. And we often look at, okay, well, you know, I'm a French teacher, so in French we say it like this. That brings this little nuance to the conversation, this little extra layer of information that as a language learner, once you become aware of it, you're much more able to communicate. And it makes you reflect on your own language as well, and how your own language would approach the communication of a particular issue.
Thank you very much. Lovely. And a subject that we could all talk on for hours, I think, really. It is fascinating how language does this. Just one final question for Chandrika. Very much a sort of a little bit of a request for help here from a teacher who uses your books and resources in her school. And she says the roadblock faced by her in educating parents about our pedagogy and what we're aiming to achieve. So, Chandrika, how do you sell your pedagogy to parents and help them to understand that the way you're doing things, which is different, no doubt, to the way they were educated, is the right way?
Yes. Well, the first thing is to actually engage parents and tell them that we are going to start using a different kind of book. But wait and see whether your child is liking it. What is the child experiencing? Listen to your child and see whether he is experiencing or she is experiencing something different in the Hindi class. The other thing that often parents do like to know is that this is a research-based methodology. It's not just a few things which have, just been put together. It's been researched. It draws from a lot of current literature in language teaching, and it has been classroom tested in many schools. So sometimes parents find that reassuring, because it's natural that parents don't want. They don't want schools to be experimenting with their children. So I think it's important to reassure the parents, and also it's important to tell them that watch how your child is responding to this methodology. So I think with those two things, parents ultimately want the best for their children. Sometimes they have questions. So if we can respond to the questions as the questions come along, and ask them to perhaps for some time keep away their own experience and allow room for something new to come in. So I think it's really a matter of engagement. It's a matter of having an empathetic communication with parents, and also reassuring them.
Yes,
if I may just add one sentence, to after I heard Chandrika, I think what's also important for parents and of course teachers to also realize that language learning is a journey. It takes its own course. There's no quick fix. It's not like we've done that many hours and now they are magically going to be speaking the language. So I think that's one tip I'd like to give, parents and educators alike, that it takes time. Be patient, persevere, and one sees success, not giving up before that. Because Chandrika said that students need some time to play with it. And you can't give up before they've actually played, failed, relearned, and, been successful. So it's going to take its own course of time, and give the children that time.
And we never get too good at a language. We never get, it's not like there's an end. We can always be better at expressing ourselves, I would imagine. So I would just like to thank everybody very, very much. Our hour is up. So bahut shukriya. And muchas gracias. Merci, Cami. And yes, I may not be a language specialist, but we are all teachers of language, and we all enjoy our ability to articulate what we think and what we feel, and that really does have to be based in the language of our home and of our childhood to start with. So thank you very much, all of you. I hope that you stay safe, Chandrika, over there in Andhra Pradesh, and we are all thinking for you and praying for you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Howard.
And thank you very much to all our attendees for joining us this evening. And a huge thank you to Kanchan Mogre, our communications officer, for organizing this evening's event. So thank you very much to everybody. And thank you very much for joining us. Camille from France, Basha, of course, from up the road. And Raphael, where are you, Raphael?
I'm currently in Dubai.
Dubai, lovely. And Nayantara, of course, also. I imagine you're in Mumbai as well, are you, Nayantara? So thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.